The two most powerful warriors are patience and time. This is such a profound observation by Leo Tolstoy, and yet it totally conflicts with the reality that is our everyday life, doesn't it? I have to confess, the other day I was totally outraged because the Uber driver showed up 4 minutes later than the app said that he would be there. So, not so patient. But this is the reality of our life today. We expect a car to just show up at the touch of our fingertips. We have a 24-hour news cycle. We want to read it on our phone. We want it in 140 characters or less. We want instant gratification, and patience and time are in short supply. So as a public interest lawyer, I experienced this conflict between Tolstoy's powerful warriors and the crazy whirlwind that is today's society on a daily basis. At the Center for Public Interest Law, our mission is to harness the power of the law to institute positive social change. And changing the law is a long and complex process. And that's by design. Our Constitution ensures that we have checks and balances to make sure that we can't just change the law on a whim. I'm sure many of you participated or at least followed the March for Our Lives a couple weeks ago. And these amazingly inspirational students have taken us with them on their own journey to change the law, right? They're on their own mission. And they've brought this 24-hour news cycle with them. And we all are feeling like this urgency of now. Like nobody wants another school shooting. But how do we recognize, first of all, like how many laws have to actually change before we can, institute the reforms that these students are demanding? Is it one federal law? Is it 50 laws of all the different 50 states? Is it the Second Amendment itself? Is there room for middle ground? So how do we balance this urgency of now with due process and with the reality that is our political system today, with the intense polarization that are raising to the surface by hearing about this issue? And I passionately believe that those of us in higher education have the power to bridge these gaps. And we have the power to answer these questions. We can rise above this politics as usual with our expertise, and we can empower our students with the tools that they need to turn the tide. I also believe that lawyers have unique powers as change makers. I realize that we do have a bit of a difficult reputation. When my daughter was in kindergarten and I signed up for a career day, her teacher came up to me and said, "Mrs. Gramme, you're a lawyer, but you're so nice." And I think that's real. And for those of you that are social entrepreneurs in the room, you may have heard, probably your lawyers are the ones telling you, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that. And you don't have to look too far in the news to see a story about a lawyer behaving badly. But I really believe that lawyers are change makers. And sometimes litigation in the judiciary branch is the most powerful way that you can make a method of change when you have lawmakers who are just fighting with each other and they just can't get it done to make policy. And just a quick plug for a podcast is my very favorite. It's called More Perfect. I don't know if any of you have listened to it, but if you want, listen to that podcast to give you some real example of how litigation can make social change. So at the Center for Public Interest Law, what we focus on is creating change at a systemic level in California by focusing on occupational licensing agencies. So this is a picture of Dr. Nasser, who I'm sure most of you know this story. And we felt the outrage of a doctor who is abusing his power, and he was breaking the law. But what happens if the law itself is not powerful enough to prevent doctors like this from practicing? So I want to tell you this story about my center, the Center for Public Interest Law, and its experience, one story about its experience reforming the law in California. So in the late 1980s, my center put together this report about, it was called Physician Discipline in California, a Code Blue Emergency. And basically it was an in-depth study of the Medical Board of California. The Medical Board is an executive branch agency, and its job is to protect the public from bad doctors, to investigate and discipline bad doctors. But this report found, shockingly, alarmingly, that there were thousands of reports and complaints to the medical board about doctors that were misbehaving, and they basically were ignored. And this medical board was not doing anything about it. And it also found that the board really lacked the authority in the law, and it lacked the resources to really be able to go out there and investigate these bad doctors and do something about it. And there was a culture at the board. It was more about protecting or helping doctors as opposed to protecting patients. And so this report put together a list of recommendations for reforming the law. How can we create systems change? How can we change the law so that the medical board is empowered and required to go after these bad doctors and protect patients in California? And those reforms made their way all the way to a bill in Sacramento. So how many people in this room, by a show of hands, think that that bill was passed on the first try? Okay, you are right. Even though it was covered by all the major newspapers in California, and they recommended the bill and they supported the bill, that bill was killed in about 20 minutes by the California Medical Association, which is a trade association who represents doctors. And the bottom line is they were not interested in more oversight. They really didn't want the board to be more empowered to go discipline their doctors. And they're very, very powerful in Sacramento, and so they had the power to kill that bill. So fast forward about a couple years later to an example of a doctor who really exemplifies the reason that the system change needs to happen. So in 1990, on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, there was a story about a doctor who was on trial, who was convicted, and this man, his name was Dr. Clawvana, he had lost privileges to practice in a hospital in Los Angeles, and so he opened up his own birthing clinic with serving immigrant women and people that did not have health insurance for the most part. And he was administering this drug called Pitocin, which is a labor-inducing drug, even though he didn't have the proper fetal monitoring equipment that would make sure that these babies were not in distress. And 9 babies died in the course of about 4 years. And so this man was eventually arrested and he was convicted. And the evidence came out at the trial that the medical board actually had received dozens of complaints about this man. And yet the board, which was made up of mostly men, mostly white, mostly doctors, did nothing. And so the judge at this trial, who, and then it was put up on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, famously said, how many more babies need to die before the Medical Board of California gets its act together? And the board did not have its act together, but the law was weak. The law failed those 9 babies. And so I tell you that story because it really, it illustrates the way the 3 branches of government really work together to create change. So you have the executive branch, which was the medical board. You have the legislative branch, who has the power to change things but lacked the political will. And then you have the entire, the judiciary branch, which really in this case turned the tide, right, and made the law happen. But it also illustrates some really important lessons that we've learned at the Center for Public Interest Law for making change, levers that we've made. And our center has been around since 1980. So I just wanted to share you, I call them the powerful P's. So the first P is price. Changing the law comes at a price. We know this, the high price lobbyists know this, the corporations know this, and the fact is that society also pays a price. And unfortunately, people often have to die before we can actually get reforms through. So in 1990, 9 babies was too high of a price, and the law changed. In other examples, just a couple years ago, in order to get more strict reforms and disclosure laws for contractors in California, a balcony had to collapse and 6 students had to die. We have another example of dentists who were giving pediatric anesthesia during dental procedures, and 4 children died in California, and not until that happened is the legislature considering new laws. And 141 people have died in mass school shootings since Columbine. And the tide is starting to shift, and that's what these marches are about, but society has certainly paid a price. The second P is patience. And it's not endurance type of patience. It's a strategic patience where you have to wait for the right window of time in order for these things to happen. And as you can tell, the law is a slow-moving animal, but it's something that can't be rushed. The third P is partnerships. One of the most important partners that we have at the Center for Public Interest Law and all public interest advocates are the media, investigative journalists. And I really don't think we could have achieved those reforms if we didn't have this story covered on the front page of the Los Angeles Times. So that is really key. There's power in knowledge. And there's also power in relationships with other individuals or other groups who are focusing on the types of issues that we focus on. So we try to partner with them as well. And then more recently, we've been partnering with funders, people who have realized that there really is this imbalance when it comes to advocacy before our legislatures. Okay, and the final P is professors. And this is what I think is really the secret weapon. And for CPIL, I think the reason that we have been successful over the years is because we come from a university. We have this level of independence and credibility, and it allows us to rise above this political fray. And so, but we really need support from the academia, I think. And this is what I'm really calling on all of you, or if you're a faculty or if you work with faculty, to use the research that you do to translate into public policy and to participate in our democracy, to bolster our advocacy efforts. So what do we do to take action? What matters to you? You know, if you want to, all of you have a unique set of expertise that you can bring. So think about what matters most to you if you want to participate in your democracy. What drives you? And then identify your levers and your own expertise that you have. And finally, just go out there and do it. So Wednesday just marked the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination. So I wanted to close with a quote from him. This is from the Martin Luther King Memorial. And it says, "We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And I really think that exemplifies this point. Martin Luther King knew that to be a change maker, it takes a lot of patience. So all of this in this room has some unique powers. And I just want you to think about what that expertise might be and how you can bring that to democracy to amplify your voice. But it takes patience with the law, with the slow process that is the law, and with the system that we have. But we all just have to know that with patience and time, we can all be the change. Thank you.